Before attendance drops, before behaviour shifts and before staff morale declines publicly, or before parents start complaining, before outcomes move, the school already knows. Schools are incredibly sensitive to leadership. Not leadership strategy, but leadership presence. The emotional weather created by adults leading the building. And the difficult truth is this: schools often absorb leadership emotionally long before leaders realise they are transmitting anything at all. Children experience systems through relationships. Staff experience systems through trust. Culture is not what is written down. Culture is what people feel in the building repeatedly. And schools are incredibly good at directing emotional inconsistency, detecting that inconsistency. Particularly children. Children will often read leadership climate faster than adults, see the gaps, understand that there's something wrong. They just know. Before we dive back in, I want to say something to head teachers listening. Attendance rarely improves through effort alone. It improves through clarity, discipline systems and strong leadership alignment. Most leaders I speak with are working incredibly hard already. So if attendance still feels fragile in your setting, you can apply for the Senior Attendance and Leadership Review. It starts with a short strategic assessment. Eligible leaders are then invited to claim a fully funded strategic review process, typically valued at £1,000 for your school. This includes an on-site local visit, a detailed school-specific report, a follow-up strategy session, and a suite of practical leadership tools designed to help you move from reflective pressure to a clear and sustainable plan. If that would be useful in your context, you can apply now through the link in the show notes or by scanning the code on screen. And now, back to the episode. This is Headship After Hours. I'm Paul Collin. I was told that I would never make headship after attending a challenging school myself. Now with an NPQH and NPQL Level 7 Executive Coaching Accreditation and a Future Leaders alumni with more than a decade in headship, I'm still leading. I've led some of the most complex schools in the UK, improving behaviour, stabilising attendance and rebuilding culture, bringing and restoring complexity and community trust back into our UK schools. I still work in schools and I still support head teachers navigating difficult realities. I know what the real weight feels like to lead in a school. So, together, let's talk. There are some things schools respond to immediately. A fire alarm, for example, a safeguarding issue, a timetable collapse. But there are other things schools respond to much more quietly. They take their time, or maybe they don't even notice. Leadership tone, leadership anxiety, leadership consistency, leadership presence. And over time, I've become increasingly convinced that schools are some of the most emotionally sensitive organisations that exist. Not fragile, sensitive. There's a difference between those two words. Schools absorb human emotion all day long. Children do it, staff do it, parents do it, middle leaders do it. In fact, everyone in the school does that in some way. And whether we like it or not, senior leadership teams become emotionally reference points inside that system. The school watches leadership constantly, not formally, not consciously, but relationally. People notice. They notice how leaders enter rooms, how they respond under pressure, whether they listen, whether they panic, whether they blame, whether they stay calm, whether they become transactional, whether they remain emotionally available. And the difficult thing about leadership is this. Most of these signals are transmitted unintentionally. People don't often realise. You rarely have the opportunity to announce cultural decline in a school. People feel it before they can describe it. The corridors change first often. The briefing rooms then follow. Then conversations become maybe shorter, more snapped, and then trust becomes thinner. Then energy changes. Then people stop bringing problems forward. And then attendance starts drifting. Behaviour starts destabilising. Staff confidence starts reducing. And eventually leaders begin trying to solve operationally what actually began emotionally a long time before. That's one of the biggest mistakes schools make. We often try to spreadsheet our way out of emotional problems. Now, this doesn't mean systems don't matter. Of course, there are clear, robust systems that do. They absolutely do matter. But systems are interpreted through emotional climates, and that the exact same behaviour policy in two schools can produce completely different outcomes. So the question becomes, why? Because children experience systems through relationships. Staff experience systems through trust. Culture is not what is written down. Culture is what people feel in the building repeatedly. And schools are incredibly good at directing emotional inconsistency, detecting that inconsistency. Particularly children. Children will often read leadership climate faster than adults, see the gaps, understand that there's something wrong. They just know. Whether adults trust each other or not, they understand that. They'll know whether staff feel safe, whether leaders are aligned, whether behaviour systems are secure, whether adults are emotionally regulated. They may not articulate it academically, but they absolutely feel it. Which means leadership is not just strategic, it's atmospheric. This is why pressured leadership matters so much, because pressure changes leadership behaviour before it changes the systems. A leader under sustained pressure often becomes more reactive, less relational, more urgent, more transactional, and less reflective. And eventually the school begins absorbing that emotional urgency. The weather, as they say, changes. And once the weather changes inside a school, everything becomes much harder. Behaviour becomes more challenging, attendance becomes harder to maintain and it decreases. Staff retention becomes harder, decision making becomes harder. There is a list of things. Not because people suddenly become worse, but because human systems are relational systems. This is one of the reasons Simon Sinek's work around psychological safety resonates so strongly in leadership conversations. High trust environments consistently outperform fearful ones over time. John Maxwell has always framed leadership fundamentally as influence, not position, not hierarchically, but influence. And influence spreads emotionally before it spreads structurally. I think one of the most dangerous myths in education is the idea that leadership only exists in a sort of formal moments. For example, inset days or assemblies, presentations, improvement plans. But schools are actually shaped more powerfully by repeated micro interactions. The corridor conversations, the briefing tone, the response to a mistake and an honest, integral reaction to that, the way pressure is handled publicly, the emotional consistency of all of the senior team or leaders. That is what staff remember. Not because staff are difficult, not because young people are difficult, but because all of us, all of those people are human. And the reality is schools rarely become stable accidentally. They become stable when leadership becomes emotionally predictable. Not robotic, not performative, but predictable, safe, trusted, steady. Because ultimately leadership is not just about moving systems forward. It's about stabilising human beings while systems move forward. And schools always know when that is happening. The school always knows, and it's for us as leaders. It's for us as leaders to become understanding of that. It knows when leadership becomes fearful as a school. It knows when leadership becomes performative. It knows when trust begins to weaken in some way. But equally, schools know when leadership becomes calm. They can feel it, when it's consistent, when it's relational, when it's human, because schools are incredibly sensitive to leadership. And perhaps the most important question any leader can ask is not what strategy are we implementing over maybe the next 90 days, but what emotionally and climate-wise are we creating while we implement it? If something in this episode has resonated, well, sit with it for a moment. Leadership is not meant to be carried in silence. If this conversation helped you think differently, well, that matters. If today's conversation resonated and attendance remains a pressure point in your school context, you can apply for the Senior Attendance and Leadership Review. It begins with a short strategic assessment. Eligible leaders are then invited to claim a fully funded review process typically valued at £1,000, including an on-site school visit, a detailed report and practical tools to support a clear 90-day plan. If that would be useful in your context, you can apply now using the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening and stay connected.